Hello, I am Edward. Imagine waking to frantic bells and the whisper that an invisible storm has reached your town. This was the horrific day the Black Plague arrived in Europe, the moment when ordinary life slipped out of its frame and fear took the streets. People did not know what moved in the air that morning. Some blamed a curse, others a shift in the heavens. Traders entering the harbor swore it followed ships. They spoke of cargo unloaded in a hurry and sailors taken ill. Few noticed the tiny travelers hidden in fur and cloth, the kind that hitch a ride on a rat. By the time suspicion became certainty, the town clock had already lost its rhythm. But the reality, say, is even more intriguing. The plague did not strike like a single spear. It crept along roads and rode quiet winds from port to port. In one place it began as a fever. In another it opened as a cough. Sometimes it rushed like fire. Why did one house fall silent while the next kept singing for a time? That question haunted every lane. As the sun climbed, the city tried to pretend. Shops opened. Even so, rumor outran every messenger. A neighbor was said to have collapsed at the well. Lock the gates, someone said. Keep outsiders out, yet trade had already braided towns together like rope, and rope pulls both wealth and risk. The truth behind this might surprise you. The best defense was not prayer alone or blame thrown at strangers. It was space and clean habits, ordinary steps that require courage when fear demands a crowd. Officials who dared to close markets and ask families to keep apart were mocked at first. A week later, even skeptics pulled shutters closed and left baskets at doors rather than hands at thresholds. By afternoon, the rhythm of work was gone. Bells marked new rules. A rope across a lane meant no passage. A chalk mark on a door meant caution. Volunteers, faces wrapped in cloth, carried supplies to steps. A few healers kept notes, counting who fell ill and when, trying to learn the shape of the storm while standing in the rain of it. Their lists would later help cities set aside clean quarters and air out bedding. Yet the plague changed more than health. With fields empty of hands, wages rose. Landowners learned that fear cannot harvest crops. In a twist of history, suffering forced a slow reform. The old order bent, and in places it did not spring back. Night drew on, and candles became a map of who still watched and who had already fled. Families spoke in whispers about where to go if tomorrow brought worse. Some chose to stay, tending the sick and burying the lost with dignity. Others loaded carts and followed the road, chasing the rumor that a nearby village was still untouched. But the plague did not keep a single address. It followed traffic, grain, animals, and the human habit of kindness that moves people toward one another. People asked what caused this terror. Bad air was blamed. Outsiders were blamed. Later, careful observers tied the pattern to small creatures we rarely notice, and to the way trade concentrates both wealth and risk. On this day, though, the lesson was practical. Fresh air helped, space helped, time helped. So did the humility to say, we do not yet know, but we will learn. As midnight neared, the city felt like a held breath. Then, as always, dawn returned. The plague did not end with it, but light allowed choices. Ships waited outside harbors. Streets were given time to air. Cloth was washed in running water. These steps did not erase the storm. They gave people a path through it. Remember this image, a continent tied by ambition and exchange, met a force that rode the same roads. The day the Black Plague devastated Europe was not a single blow. It was a chain pulled tight, in hours, then weeks. From that day forward, cities kept records, built quarantine houses near their walls, and designed hospitals with windows that opened. Out of fear came new habits. Out of loss came a resolve to survive and to leave signs for those who would face the next great test. At first light, the harbour was a gallery of choices. Some captains raised anchors and turned their prows toward open water. Others waited in silence, flags lowered, hoping the wind would carry the rumour elsewhere. On the quay, a clerk scratched names into a ledger, recording crews and cargo, with a note beside some entries that read held outside the walls. It was the start of a habit that would echo across cities. Markets reopened in a cautious half-step. Stalls were spaced wider. Coins were dunked in bowls of vinegar before changing hands. Barbers were told to boil their tools. Bakers left loaves on benches and stepped back so a hand could reach, without a breath shared. In houses where a cough had started, windows were lifted and bedding hung to catch the sun. A bellman walked the lanes calling rules that sounded like kindness turned into law. Share water at the well, he said, but do not crowd. Leave food by the door, he said, and speak from the step. By noon the city learned a new rhythm. Priests opened courtyards so neighbors could stand apart and still hear comfort. An old midwife taught families to scrub floors with hot water and ash. The plague pressed hardest where rules were hardest to keep. In workshops where needles and thread made a living, distance cost time. In taverns where news flowed, quiet felt like loss. People who depended on crowds learned to trade by message and bundle. It was not perfect. It was better than standing still. Late in the day, elders met beneath an open gallery roof. They debated where to set aside houses for the sick, how to feed those who agreed to stay indoors, how to watch the roads without turning the world cruel. One suggested pushing water through new channels to rinse streets. Another proposed a book that listed every house and who lived there, not to punish, but to make help swift. In the end, a single idea lifted above the rest. We must act together or not at all. Night returned, and with it a question asked by many kitchens at once. Do we visit our sister across the square and carry comfort with our hands? Or do we tie it in cloth and leave it on the step and carry comfort with our restraint? Families chose, and those choices, multiplied by thousands, bent the curve of the storm in ways they could not yet see. The morning after, the city felt lighter by the smallest measure. Not safe, not finished, but steadier. The bellman still walked, and the clerk still wrote, and the midwife still laughed at children to make the washing thorough. More windows stayed open, more benches bore bread. The rope across the lane was still there, and now it felt like a promise rather than a threat. Weeks would pass before the worst could be called past, yet from that day forward, Europe carried new habits. Ports learned to hold a ship outside for a span to make sure the crew was sound. Planners drew maps that treated wind and water as allies. Builders cut more windows into hospitals so light and air could share the work with hands. Laws grew from experience, and so did mercy, because people had seen how quickly blame becomes smoke while care becomes shelter. The plague did not give gifts. People made them out of what they learned and what they refused to forget. The lesson that traveled farthest was simple. When fear says close your fist, open your window. When rumor says run, pause long enough to think and then help. And when the world tilts, remember the first truth discovered on that horrific day. We are safer when we are careful with one another. So picture the street as dusk returns. A neighbor leaves a loaf at a door and steps back. A girl carries a bucket to the pump and hums to keep her courage steady. Above them the sky keeps its color. The storm is not done, but the city has learned how to stand inside it. That is how a continent survived, not through a single miracle, but through 1,000 small decisions repeated until the danger loosened its grip and the future felt possible again.